In this video, we're going to go through how to make an advanced level or scene switching system in Godot using some custom child handling and doing something a bit more advanced than Godot's built-in change scene function. You're going to be able to go back and forth between scenes just like this and have a really nice dynamic code that you can apply to your own level switching system in your own game. In this video, we won't get to doing a transition animation or passing data between scenes. Those will come in the next two videos in this series to really round out how to make an amazing scene switcher in Godot. Let's get started. Okay, so let me introduce you to the example scenes I've created to help make this tutorial. I've got two levels, they are exactly the same. This is the grass level. It's a scene that has just a colored rectangle, a label with a title, and a button that we're going to connect to a signal to change the scene. And besides this grass level, I've also got a desert level, which is literally the exact same tree, same scene tree. Only difference is that the box is sand colored instead of green. And so we're going to be running our grass level here, hitting this button to change this scene to the desert level. And you'll notice that on both our desert level over here on the top left and in our grass level on the top left here, we've got a script attached. It's the same script, this level script for both of them. And right now I've got an on change scene button pressed. The change scene buttons in both of these scenes are connected to this signal. And if you don't know about signals, you want to look at another tutorial for that. We're going to be using signals pretty heavily here, so I would suggest looking into that first. There will be a suggestion for a video you can use to do that in the top right as a card. Anyway though, so we need to connect this change scene button, this signal here. We need to actually make the function this signal is connected to change scenes. Now, in Godot, fortunately, the engine makes it really easy to change scenes. It's actually something we can do in just one line of code, and that is get tree. So this is a function, and then on the return value of this function, we're going to call change scene. And you'll notice as soon as I do that, we start getting some autocomplete here, which has a bunch of paths to our different scenes in the game. And you'll see a bunch of stuff here, but you'll notice right here, I've got desert level and grass level. So now I've got grass level here. This is the one that we're currently working from. So I can just enter desert level. And so this change scene function takes the path in your resources directory. So this relative path that Godot creates to the level. It's a string path to the scene file itself. And so we'll give it the scene path for the desert level. And now whenever I click this button, it's going to change to that scene. Now let's talk really briefly about what's happening under the hood here. The first thing we're doing is calling getTree. We need to do this because it gets the scene tree object itself in Godot. So it gets the overall scene tree. And this scene tree, this special object in Godot is the actual object that has a change scene function on it. So whenever you want to change scenes, you need to call getTree first. And then once you actually have the scene tree, then you're calling change scene here. Now, another thing to note is that when we change scenes, this new scene is loaded in. They create a new instance. The engine creates a new instance of this desert level, and then it will get rid of, or it will kill, it will free up the current scene. So once we change to this desert level, our grass level will be freed. It'll be queue freed, so it'll be freed when it's safe, but it's going to change into our desert level and free our grass level in the background. Now, this is okay, but what it means is that once we initiate the changing of the scenes, if there are things we want to finish up or sounds we want to play, etc., or an animation we want to play in our grass level before the scene changes, we're not going to be able to do that because Godot is going to change the scene instantly. So we'll talk about in just a second some ways we can get around that. But first, let's run this and see if it works. So if I hit Command R to run our scene here, or you can just hit this button up at the top right. If I do this, we'll see our grass level. And now if I click this button, all of a sudden, we're on our desert level. Now there's a problem here because we are hard coding our desert level scene path in our script, so we're always going to be changing back to our desert level. So we can't get back to our grass level, but we'll also change that right now. So this line of code is the easiest and simplest way to change scenes in Godot. It is incredibly easy. It's one line of code. You can either hard code this path in, or you could do something a little fancier where you can pass in a dynamic path if you have multiple scenes you might want to change to or multiple options. Both of those are very easy to do. But we've talked about two limitations. One is that hard coding this string in here limits the ability or the amount of scenes. It limits your options on what scenes you can transition to. And more importantly, the second limitation is that it prevents you from doing any cleanup or animations, etc. on your current scene before you transition to your new scene. Additionally, there might be things you want to load or initialize on your new scene before it actually becomes present or visible to the player. There's a lot of things you might want to do in the background, just because even if your scene is loaded, you might want to spawn in a bunch of things or do some custom logic, etc. There's a lot of cases. And so in order to get around both of those limitations, we're actually going to build a scene switcher parent node that's going to handle all of our scene switching logic. So in order to do this, I've created a new scene. It is consisted of just one node, a regular node, not a 2D, a node 2D or a spatial, but just a regular node that I've called scene switcher. And what we're going to do here is actually instance a grass level or whatever your default level would be. You know, you can expand this to be the level system that you have in your own game, but I'm going to instance our grass level as a child of our scene switcher because that will be our default level. So I'll hit the instance button here and I'll find grass level. And I'll hit open, and now all of a sudden, if I select our scene switcher here, and now if I select the 2D view, we can see in our scene switcher, we've got a grass level. And so we've got this script here on our grass level already on both of our levels, but we're going to take some of that scene switching functionality up to our scene switcher now. So because our button to switch scenes is tied to our specific levels, our grass level or our desert level, we need to have a way for those levels to communicate to our scene switcher that the player wants to switch the scene. So now, instead of having this getTree.changeScene line, we're actually going to add a new line on our level script, and I'm going to say signal level changed. And this signal is going to tell our scene switcher, hey, the player has changed the level, so now you need to adjust our game to actually change that level. And so we'll have this, and I'm actually going to get rid of this line here, line 8, and change this to be emit signal, and this is going to be our new level changed signal here. There's also going to be one other thing I'm going to do, which is to give an export variable here with our level name or level index. You don't have to do this. It might work better to do a numbered index, or maybe you don't even need an index at all. Maybe your levels are self-sufficient in your game. But the reason I want to give a string index to our levels in this one is just so we have an easy way for our scene switcher to tell which level is the current level and which level the player wants to go to. So I'm going to say export, and I'll say string, because we're going to do a string and a variable, and this will be level name. And I'm going to just default this to be level. And then we'll be able to edit this in the editor for each level to make it really easy. And so what I'm going to do is add a parameter to our level change signal here, which is going to be the level name. And then when we emit this signal, I will just pass in the level name as that parameter. Really easy. And now what I'm going to do in the editor is actually give our levels a name. So this grass level is going to be grass. And same for the desert. You can tell where this is going to go. I'm going to go to our desert scene and change this to be desert. Okay. Now all of a sudden our levels are emitting this signal here, and our code is very generic. It doesn't matter which level we're on anymore. We're not hard coding anything, which is really nice. Now our grass level and desert level can reuse the same script, and it's not going to cause any issues. So if I go back to our scene switcher here, now we know that our level, whenever we hit this button, is going to be emitting a signal, and that signal is going to be level changed. So now that we know the name of our signal here, we're going to add a script to our scene switcher. So I'll just hit the new script button, hit create. And what I'm going to do is on the ready function, so in ready, I'm going to say grass level dot connect, and this is going to be, you'll see it even pops up level changed. And we're going to connect it to ourself, so a scene switcher, and we'll make a new function on our scene switcher called handle level changed. And this is the function where we're going to handle everything that comes in whenever we change our levels here. And so we'll say function handle level change. Again, make sure that this matches exactly what you've typed in the string over here. And remember, our signal has a parameter, and that parameter is the new level, or the current level name. So we'll say current level name, and this is going to be a string parameter. Okay, and now that we're getting our current level name, there's a few things we need to do here to make our scene switching work really well. And before we dive into writing the code for this, it would be good for you to take a second and think about in your own game how you're going to handle getting your different scene files. I'll talk about it briefly about how we'll do it for this tutorial, but take a second and think about for your own game and extrapolate as needed. Now, when you use that change scene function that we saw earlier, we have to get the path, right? Our scene path, the file path to a scene. And so in order to do that, we kind of have to know somehow from one scene to another which path we need to take. And there's a lot of ways you can handle that in a bigger game. Let's say your game has 50 levels and they're indexed by numbers. So you have level 1, 2, 3, 4 instead of grass level and desert level. So it's numbers that drive your level's names. What you could do then is have all your level scenes exist in the same folder and then have them named appropriately. So it's always level 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And then you could make it really easy on yourself by having a hard-coded string that gets the path to that level's folder, but then you pass in the dynamic variable or a parameter that just has the number of the level. And then so you don't have to worry about getting the hard-coded string every time, because you really only care about the number of that level, the index of that level, because you are using a consistent naming pattern. So there are multiple ways to make this work with a bunch of levels. You'll have to figure out some logic in your own game about how to easily and consistently get the level you need from one to the other. But we're not really going to worry about that now, even though we'll write some code that will help you do that. So with that in mind, we need to think about for our own game, if we are in the grass level, we need to go to the desert level. And if we're in the desert level, we need to go to the grass level. And so somehow we need to get the correct scene file path depending on which level we're on. So in order to do that, we're going to first add a new variable here in our scene switcher. And I'm going to make this an onReady variable, and I'll explain why in a second. And this will be current level. And this is going to be the level in our scene. So not the path, but the actual level instance itself in our scene tree that corresponds to the current level. So because our grass level is default, I'm going to set this to be grass level. And what we can do now is get rid of this grass level in our ready and just say current level. You don't have to do it. It'd still work if we got grass level, but this is a little bit nicer. And this is why we're doing an onReady variable here, is because we want it to default when our scene readies up to our default scene that we've got our default level. So now that we have that, let's think about what we need to implement here in our handle level change function. So when we have this function called, when this signal comes in and we get our current level name, we need to determine based on our current level name what the next level should be. So we're going to make a variable here at the top of our handle level change function. It'll be variable next level. Similar to our current level, this is going to be the actual scene we're going to instance. And so we'll say next level, and we'll just set it to that for now, just because we'll keep it as a scene. Or we'll keep it as null for now and instance it later. And I'm going to use a match statement here. A match, if you're not familiar in GD script, is the same as a switch statement in other languages. Now, since we only have 2 levels, using a match statement is kind of silly. We could just use an if-else or a ternary, but because having 2 levels is kind of unusual, I'm going to write code here that expects more levels, and that'll be easier for most of you with your own games. So just bear with me here, even though this is kind of contrived. So we're going to match on our current level name. So match current level name. And then we're going to, we have, in order to get the possible options our current level can be, we're just going to use the fact that we know there's grass and desert. But if you had a lot of levels, you might want to use an enum for this, or a consistent file name scheme, for example, something that makes it easy for you to know or do a match statement here, or however you want to do it. Again, we have the benefit of just having 2 levels, but you'll want to use some kind of consistent naming pattern or an enum or something that makes it so that you know ahead of time what possible options you'll have here. And so now that we're matching on the current level name, we'll use the 2 options we know it could be, which are grass. And so if it's the grass level, we will set next level to be our desert level. And remember that our levels, our scene files, are resources in Godot. So we have to load them in. So we'll say next level equals load. And here we have to give it a path. So we'll say res. And it's not going to give us good auto completion for this path, but you can look in your scene tree here. So we see it's res and then change scenes and then desert level. You'll have a different path in your own game, but I'll just use this. So change scenes. Remember, I'm getting it from the scene tree over here on the left. So res, change scenes, and then desert level. So I'll say desert level.tscene, and we'll make this a little bit nicer in a second. And so what I'm doing is I'm loading in our next level here. And now we can do the same for desert. If our current level is the desert level, I'm just going to copy this line and then change this desert level to be grass level. And you see that these lines are almost identical except for the grass and desert. So that should suggest to you, hey, maybe there's a way we can kind of consolidate this code. And you're exactly right if that's what you're thinking. We'll get there in a second. Now, we do want to have an error case here, so we'll just use this underscore, which in GD script says just match whatever. And if this is the case, we'll just return. We will not change the level because we got a level name that is invalid. We don't know how to handle it. So let's make this match statement a little bit more robust and easier to work with. So let's extrapolate a little bit of the code here. So we know we're always going to be writing next level equals load. Actually, let me just copy this line. So we know that we're always going to be writing next level equals load because we've done that twice now, right? So in each of these match statements, these cases, we're going to be writing load and then res, change scenes, and then something level. It might be grass, it might be desert, but it's something level. So what we can actually do is then just have, we can do some string concatenation and say like next level name. This is a variable we don't have, but we're about to make it. Let's say we did have a variable with the string level name, and then we can just do a plus sign there. And so we can just do a dynamic variable here that prevents us from having to load this in every time. And so now what we could do, if we create a new variable called next level name, this will be a string. We can change these lines, for example. So this one right here, instead of saying loading in the entire scene, we can just change it to be desert. And remember, capital, because that's the name of our file there. Same thing here, we can just change this to be grass. And now all of a sudden what we're doing, oh, and we also need to change this from next level to be next level name. So I hope that kind of made sense. What we're doing here is just simplifying this a little bit. We are using this match statement to get the level name for our next level, and then we're taking advantage of the fact that we have a consistent naming scheme for all of our levels to just dynamically insert or concatenate our string, the string of our file path to our scene, and we're just going to pass that in. So we'll, depending on our current level, get the name of our next level, and then insert that name into this string file path to load in our next level into our actual next level variable. Now, even though we're loading in this variable or this scene resource, though, it's not actually in our game yet. We have to instance this. And all scene files, this is a packed scene is what Godot calls it. It's a type of resource that holds a scene file. There's a function on them called instance. And so we're going to call instance, and this is going to actually create a new instance of this resource and store it in our next level variable. So now our current level stores the actual instance in our scene tree of our current level, and our next level stores an actual instance of our next level, but it's not in our scene tree yet. So that's another thing we need to do. So now we have our next level, we can say add child next level. And this is going to add our next level as a child of our scene switcher, just like our grass level is. And now that it's in our scene tree, we'll actually be able to see it. But there's a couple things we need to do then now that it's going to be visible. One is we need to get rid of our current level. So we can say current level dot queue free, and this is going to free our current level. Then we can set our current level to be our next level. So now we have a new next level. And now that we've done all this, if we run our game, we should see again that we've got our scene switching working, except now we've got something much more dynamic and able to adapt to anything our game needs than we had before when we were just hard coding the path. So if I run the scene and I hit change scene, we'll see that we switch scenes, which is amazing. But if I hit the button again, we'll see there's still a problem. It doesn't go back to our grass scene. And the reason it doesn't do that is because we never connected the signal to change levels again when we get our new scene. So in order to do that, we need to use pretty much the same line that we have on line 8, this same connection variable here. So I'm going to copy and paste this connect part and then say, we'll say next level dot, and then I'll just copy this paste in. So next level connect, level changed, self handle level changed. So what we're saying here is like, hey, when we click the button on this next level, which is now about to become our current level, then we also need to emit the same handle level changed signal. Because we're doing the same line in two places, it does suggest we could probably pull this out into its own function, which would be really easy to do and a good thing to do, but we've got a couple more changes we need to go through, so we won't get to that quite yet. So now we've got a system that lets us change back and forth between our levels really easily, and it's dynamic, the code works well, and it's going to be really easy, or it's going to be able to handle any type of level switching we need. So we've really improved our basic level switching that we have. And you'll notice that we're not using the built-in change scene function that we looked at earlier. That's because you can basically do the same thing by adding and removing children. You're kind of doing the same thing that change scene does, except instead of what change scene does is it changes the root scene. We're not actually doing that because we have this scene switcher scene, the scene switcher node, that is persistent. It's never leaving the tree, so we don't actually need to change our root node itself. We're just changing which child of our scene switcher is currently present. So it's a little bit of a difference, but this gives you a lot more fine-grained control over how to change scenes in Godot. So my recommendation generally is to do it like this. If you can avoid it and you've got any sort of complexity in your game, you're probably not going to want to use Godot's built-in getTree.changeScene function. You're probably going to want to handle manually changing scenes like we do here by adding and removing children. So this is really awesome. We should be really happy with the system that we have that lets us change scenes now. Now, there's still one problem with this, which is that when we hit this change scene button, our new scene isn't really waiting until it's fully loaded to show, and our current scene isn't really making sure that everything it needs to do is done before we change scenes. And so what we're going to do in the next video is actually create a transition animation that while that animation plays and there's kind of a fade away on the screen, everything is happening in the background. So all the things we need to do, the old scene is cleaning itself up and the new scene is loading everything it needs to in while our transition animation plays. And that makes the transition a lot less jarring, and it gives both the old and the new scene, the new levels that we're switching to, time to actually load in or clean up and do everything they need to do. So stay tuned for that next video. It's going to be really exciting. And then after that, we'll finish up this series by talking about how we can pass information between scenes. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I hope this video has been helpful in creating your own level or scene switcher in your own game. If you did find this video helpful, a like and subscribe always helps and supports the channel. We'd love to have you in our Discord. You can ask any questions there, and the link to that is in the description below. And if you do find my work helpful, you can donate a coffee on Buy Me a Coffee. The link to that is also in the description below, and doing that is much appreciated, helps me to continue to make great videos. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next video.